Hi, welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck, and we're almost finished part the 6th at Christminster again, and it's chapter 5 that I'm going to talk about in the next few chapters. I wish I could finish it today, but I know that it's going to go long, and then I'll, start rushing it at the end, and I don't want to have to redo this. It's just it's been a lot of work for this one book, but that's okay. That's no matter. Anyway, so Sue goes back to Phillotson is what we start with in this chapter. And all we get in the very beginning is Jude, sort of wakes up from like this bad dream and says, she's gone from me now forever. And it's just very miserable, as it will be from here on out. So she gets to Richard. She tells Richard she doesn't want him to meet her at the station. You see still just a little bit of Sue's independence there. At work, but she makes it sound like, I'm not worthy of you coming to the station and waiting for me. I'll just come to you. So he says fine. He's had his friend Gillingham there with him throughout this, encouraging him to, make her stay this time. Yeah. But he tells her later, tighten the rings, but don't do it all at once, just gradually. And you see, as I'll point out, it kind of goes back to that image where they are killing the rabbit. Jude's killing the rabbit to put it out of its misery because it's in a trap. So you kind of continue to see marriage as a trap. So when she gets there, she says, I've come, Richard, she said, looking pale and shaken and sinking into a chair. I cannot believe you forgive your wife. Everything, darling Susanna, said Phillotson. She started at the endearment, though it had been spoken advisedly without fervor. Then she nerved herself again. My children are dead, and it's right that they should be. I'm glad almost. They were sin begotten. They were sacrificed to teach me how to live. Their death was the first stage of my purification. That's why they have not died in vain. You will take me back? He was so stirred by her pitiful words and tone that he did more than he meant to do. He bent and kissed her cheek. Sue imperceptibly shrank away, her flesh quivering under the touch of his lips. Phillotson's heart sank, for desire was rancid in him. You still have an aversion to me. And, it's not even only that, but Sue isn't the same girl that Phillotson fell in love with. There's no way that she can be. So this different Sue is going to be obedient and force herself to have feelings that she doesn't have. But that's not really going to help Phillotson. Physical attraction can only take you so far. There has to be something else between them besides someone coming to you and saying, this is my punishment. I have to come back to you. And Sue's reaction is, oh no, I have a chill, not feeling well. I'm just a little shooken up. It's not you. And so Phillotson says, okay, well, there's the license over there. And then, of course, she has another one of these moments where she kind of winces, I guess would be the right word. It goes, ooh, a license to marry. So, she's not completely gone, but she's trying to be completely gone and trying to be something that she's not and love someone that she doesn't love. And it's not going to be lost on Phillotson that this is the way it's going to be. And so he says, okay, well, why don't you go see Mrs. Edlin where she was supposed to be staying. That was the faithful widow that came to nurse Jude. And, she's got her dresses picked out, and this woman is a character. Anyways, a lot of Hardy's characters that are like servants in a way, or seen as lower class, sometimes they're the funniest people to listen to. And so she picks out this very tastefully embroidered dress that Sue had once actually got to wear with Jude. And she refuses to put it on. She wants something completely modest. It's almost like she wants to dress like a nun now. And, Miss Evelyn's like, what's wrong with you? It's beautiful. And why would you want to wear that? Look at, wear this. And Sue says, it's adulterous. It signifies what I don't feel. I bought it long ago to please Jude, and it must be destroyed. Miss Evelyn lifted her hands, and Sue excitedly continued to tear the linen into strips, laying the pieces in the fire. You might have given it to me, said the widow. It do my heart ache to see such pretty open work as that burned by flames. Not that ornamental night rails can be, much use to an old woman like I. For my days be all past and gone. It's an accursed thing. It reminds me of what I want to forget, Sue repeated. It's only fit for the fire. Lord, you be too strict. What do you use such words for, and condemn to hell your little innocent children that's lost to ye? Upon my life, I don't call that religion. And Evelyn is she's like the voice of reason here too, because she also decides to go confront Phillotson, which this is not something you would normally do. You don't go outside of your class and tell somebody else, look, I think you have this wrong. I don't get this. I know I'm not a real religious person, but that can't be right. And so she sees Sue in her state, and and she also mentions that you shouldn't get married. You don't love him. You love the other man. You love Jude. What are you doing? And she doesn't really get anywhere, so she decides, well, maybe Phillotson, if he understands that this is not something she really wants to do, maybe he'll change his mind. But Phillotson is very influenced by his friend in, make her do it this time. Don't screw this up. And he says to his friend, yes, I suppose I'm right in taking her at her word. I confess there seems to be a touch of selfishness in it. That's his little conscience saying, not good. Apart from her being what she is, of course, a luxury for a fogey like me, it will set me right in the eyes of the clergy and Orthodox laity, who have never forgiven me for letting her go, so I may get back in some degree into my old track. Well, if you've got any sound reason for marrying her again, do it now in God's name. I was always against you opening the cage door and letting the bird go in such an obviously suicidal way. You might have been a school inspector by this time, or reverend, if you hadn't been so weak about her. I did myself irreparable damage. I know it. Once you've got her housed again, stick to her. So again, it's sort of like this animalistic, the references of like taming a horse, caging an animal, a bird. You were too soft with her, and you didn't do your job as a man. Keep her in her place. And so, he has that influence, and then, of course, Evelyn isn't going to have much influence, but, he feels like what he's doing is wrong, but it's certainly living by the letter. And so, I keep going back to that theme, because everything you can write about in this novel is going to go back to that one inscription, the letter killeth. And then I would talk about how, the rest of the verse is the Spirit lives, but you don't see it. In fact, you're going to hear the verse again. Not this time, but next time, towards the end. Okay, so where was I? Oh, yeah. Okay, so Edlin gets there, and she tries to reason with Phillotson. And she says, she's forcing herself to do it, poor little thing, and you've no notion of what she's suffering. I was never much for religion, nor against it. But it can't be right to let her do this, and you ought to persuade her out of it. Of course, everybody will say it was good and forgiving of thee to take her to thee again, but for my part, I don't. It's her wish, and I am willing, said Phillotson with a grave reserve, opposition making him illogically tenacious now. A great piece of laity will be rectified. I don't believe it. She's his wife, if anybody's. She's had 3 children by him. And he loves her dearly. And it's a wicked shame to egg her on like this, poor little quivering thing. She's got nobody on her side. The one man who she'd find her friend, the obstinate creature, won't allow to come near her. What first put her in this mood of mind, I wonder? I can't tell. Now, he knows there's something wrong with her. But he says, I can't tell. Not a certainty. Certainly. Not I certainly, I'm sorry. It is all voluntary on her part. Now, that's all I have to say, Phillotson spoke stiffly. You've turned around, Mrs. Edlin. This is unseemly of you. Well, I knowed you be affronted at what I had to say, but I don't mind that. The truth's the truth. And so that's what I mean, this, lower class character talking to someone who is very educated, wants to be ordained as a priest, and it's almost as like out of the mouths of babes. I don't know what you're calling religion, but this can't be it. You people are screwed up. And I'm not going to keep it to myself because it bothers her conscience. She's got to say something. So, she has that little protest. They end up getting married anyway. And he briefly kind of says that people are happy about this marriage. They approve. Society approves. All that's well that ends well. But there's still the problem of actually being married and going through that. And he writes, when the schoolmaster got back, Sue was making a pretense of doing some housewifery stuff as she lived there, but she seemed timid at his approach, and compunction wrought on him at the sight of it. Now, this is the night of the wedding, something's supposed to happen. And so he says, of course, my dear, I shan't expect to intrude upon your personal privacy any more than I did before. He said gravely, it is for our good socially to do this, and that's its justification, if it was not my reason. Sue brightened a little. Okay, so we have that. Now, meanwhile, Arabella knows what's going on here, and she's determined to get Jude back. So she goes there under the pretense that her father has thrown her out. Now, later on, she confronts her dad, and they did have a little bit of a fight. But I don't think it was to the degree where she comes to Jude and says, I absolutely have nowhere to go. My father has turned me out for good. He doesn't want anything to do with me. He doesn't love me. He won't give me any money. And in truth, there was a lot of women who were left kind of desolate after her husband died. It's not like we have things in place these days like insurance and security, and you really had to depend on your family a lot. So for Arabella to want a husband again, it's purely economical reasons, I think. You know, it's just going to make things a little bit easier on her, even though when she learned the first time it didn't. But she's also, you know, wants to be seen as respectable, even though she's not. Jude at first, when she shows up, says, I can't let you in here. There's no way, you know, I don't have, there's not any room. And then he starts to feel bad. And that's kind of Jude's, when it is a weakness for women, to me, it's not so much that he's just, you know, overcome with lust at the thought of having her there all night. I think his weakness is that he doesn't want to hurt anybody, any poor creature, whether it's a bird or Arabella. He will always do what he needs to do to make it right. And so he checks with the guys, says, can I like put her in this closet area? And they sort it out. And then Arabella brings up the news that Sue and Phillotson, from what I hear, might be getting married again. And so he writes, while they were waiting for this news to be done, Arabella said, you know the news, I suppose. I guess what you mean, but I know nothing. I had a letter from Annie at Albertson today. She had just heard that the wedding was to be yesterday, but she didn't know if it had come off. I don't wish to talk of it. No, of course you don't. Only it shows what kind of woman. Don't speak of her, I say. She's a fool, and she's an angel, too, poor dear. If it's done, he'll have a chance of getting back to his old position by everybody's account. So Annie says, all his well-wishers wish to be pleased, including the bishop himself. Do spare me, Arabella. I really don't want to know about this. But then again, he does. So he gives her a little money so she could go find out what really happened. Are they married or are they not? And then she confirms her news. She comes back to Jude and says, they're married. And he says, of course they are. He returned. She observed, however, a hard strain upon his lip as he spoke. Annie says she's heard from Belinda, her relation, out in Marygreen, that it was very sad and curious. How do you mean sad? She wanted to marry him again, didn't she? And he her. Yes, that was it. She wanted to in one sense, but not in another. Mrs. Edlund was much upset by it all, and spoke out her mind at Phillotson. But Sue was that excited about it that she burnt her best embroidery, that she worn with you, to blot you out entirely. Well, if a woman feels like that, she ought to do it. I commend her for it entirely. Arabella sighs, and she says, you know, she felt as if her only husband, and that she belonged to no one else in the sight of God Almighty while he lived. Perhaps another woman feels the same about herself too. Arabella sighed again. So ever so crafty. She knows her prize. She's got her eye on the ball. That's a survivor for you, and that's what Arabella is. There's really no judging her, because that's the way, you know, it is in her world, in her society. She's doing what she has to do. But it is kind of pathetic what she does, because, you know, his weakness being women, the number one weakness, and the second weakness being alcohol. So her plan is just to keep him so drunk that he hardly knows what's going on once they get married, while they get married. This is how she's going to secure it. And she lets her dad in on this when she says, well, she said to him, for all your rowing me that night, I've called in, for I have something to tell you. I think I shall get married and settled again. Only you must help me. and you can do no less after what I've stood ye. I'll do anything to get you off my hands. Very well. I am now going to look for my young man. He's on the loose, I'm afraid, and I must get him home. All I want you to do tonight is not fasten the door, in case I should want to sleep here, and should be late. I thought you'd soon get tired of giving yourself airs and keeping away. Don't do the door, that's all I'm saying. That's all I have to say, she says. Okay. So she finds him, and he's trying to get drinking Sue off his mind, just like a country song. And he's about done. He's about to want to just go home, cry himself to sleep. And she says, no, let's have some more drinks. Let's party. And, you need something stronger, like take shots and get the real liquor going on here. So she gets him so drunk that she's got to help him home. And of course, for parents, they can't just very well go to a hotel together, so you need to come back to my house and I'll make sure it's safe and nobody will know about it, and it's going to be fine. As they're walking, he passes through a kind of a religious site of martyrs. How they sometimes mark them, and he's reminded of a sermon that he heard where the preacher alludes to Paul in Corinthians, and it says, if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I've gained nothing. And it kind of is really the message of the Old Testament, the New Testament, is, the greater of these things is love. That's the message. That's the new message. And so as much as he could be martyred, what good is it to sacrifice himself if he still doesn't have love? Then it's been, meaningless. And so Arbella's a little tipsy too. And she says, yes, exactly. Very thoughtful of you, dearie. Even though it hasn't much to do with our present business. Why, yes, it has. I'm giving my body to be burned. But you don't understand. It wants Sue to understand such things. And I was her seducer, poor little girl. And she's gone. And I don't care about myself. Do what you like with me. And yet, she did it for conscience sake, poor little Sue. And said, do what you want to me. Sort of like, there he is, sheep to the slaughter. In another allusion, Hardy actually calls him Samson, Jude Samson, to Arabella. She takes away his power. And Arbella's response is, hang her. I think she was right, hiccuped Arabella. I've had my feelings too, like her, and I feel I belong to you in heaven's eye, and to nobody else, till death do us part. It is never too late to mend. So they're both, wasted. Gonna go back to her house. She's gonna have her way with him probably, even though we're not gonna say that in a Victorian novel. And Dad is almost as bad as she is, because he just thinks it's funny what she's done. And, she makes sure that he's in on it. And, they're just kind of joking and laughing about it. And she says, well, I've got him upstairs. And says, yes, Jude he's back. I got the old husband back. He says, well, how does he come up to be up there? And don't ask the inconvenient questions. Now she's got to figure out, I got to get married. I got to get the priest over here. We got to make this final. And he says, oh, well, it's the rummiest thing I've heard of, marrying a husband again. Actually, I have done this. I married my first husband twice and then divorced again. And so much new blood in the world. He's no catch to my thinking. I'd have had a new one while I was about it. It isn't rum for a woman to want her old husband back for respectability, though. For a man to want his old wife back, well, perhaps it is funny, rather. And Arbella was suddenly seized with a fit of loud laughter, in which her father joined more moderately. Okay, so now he's trapped into the house, just like the rabbit. And she's making sure you just keep the liquor going, we'll be fine. That's her plan. And, you know, somebody comes, they have visitors coming by and they're announcing it, and they're having kind of a little bit of a party before the wedding ceremony. And, you know, some people are thinking, you know, this is kind of weird. This is a little bit strange why you would want to go back to, you know, your old spouse where you couldn't make it with in the first place. What makes you think this time's going to be any different? And that's a reasonable question. I know I've done it. The same things are going to keep happening over again. And so she gets her friends over there. She gets a priest, and all of this is kind of happening while Jude is just, you know, in a daze. And Mr. Taylor, I think it's Tinker Taylor, is over there, and he's, you know, I don't want to say anything against friends, but, you know, this is kind of sudden, you know, it's kind of weird. He now perceived that she was sitting beside Jude, her arm being around his waist. Jude, like the rest of the company, bore on his face the signs of how deeply he had been indulging. Well, I've been waiting for a certain legal hour to arrive. To tell the truth, she continued bashfully, and making her spiritus crimson look as much as a maiden blush as possible. Jude and I have decided to make matters between us by tying the knot again, as we find we can't do without each other at all, after all. So, as a bright notion, we agreed to sit on till it was late enough and go do it offhand. Jude seemed to pay no great heed to what she was announcing, or indeed to anything whatever. The entrance of Taylor infused flesh spirit in the company, and they remained sitting till Arabella whispered to her father, "Now we may as well go." So, you know, Jude does say something like, when did I say I was going to marry you? What promise did I make? What do you mean, what did I say? Now, he's been so drunk, he doesn't know what he said. He doesn't remember what he said. And so the father jumps in and says, "Hey, you've been here for 2 days. You're not going to marry my daughter again?" And this, you know, of course makes Jude upset. It says, "Don't say anything against my honor," enjoyed Jude hotly, standing up. "I'd marry the..." It's actually what it's... There's that line there because it's, I guess, a curse word here, but it's... what he means is, "I'd marry the whore of Babylon." You know, rather than do anything dishonorable. And the whore of Babylon is mentioned in Revelations. No reflection on you, my dear. But this is kind of a funny thing. I'll marry the whore of Babylon, not you, my dear. But yeah, that's just what I will do. It's mere rhetorical figure, what they call in the books hyperbole. You know, he says to explain this to people, making an illusion. "Keep your figures for your debts to friends who shelter you," said Don. "If I am bound in honor to marry her, as I suppose I am, though how I came to be here with her I know no more than a dead man, marry her I will. So help me God. I have never behaved dishonorably to a woman, nor any living thing. I am not a man who wants to save himself at the expense of the weaker among us." "There, never mind him, dearie," she said, putting her cheek against Jude's. "Come up and wash your face, and let's put yourself tidy, and we'll go off and make it up with Father." Okay. This is pretty much the end of that chapter. So next time you'll see when he meets with Sue for a final time what happens, and the final blow of the tragedy will strike. Okay? All right. Well, thanks for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.